Well, hello there. Thanks for coming out this Sunday. Really means a lot to see so many people and carry on a tradition. It's been interesting listening back to the oldest annual meeting recordings because they did what we're about to do, is just have a bunch of community members come up and tell stories. And thank you for your respect and patience. My name is Ben Bentley. I'm the new incoming board president, and so honored to be in this position. I just wanted to start off with a little poem of respect. I thought it would be a nice way to begin this. This is from the Acoma poet Simon Ortiz. It's called What My Uncle Tony Told My Sister and Me. Respect your mother and father. Respect your brothers and sisters. Respect your uncles and aunts. Respect your land, the beginning. Respect what is taught you. Respect what you are named. Respect the gods. Respect yourself. Everything that is around you is a part of you. I think that's why this is important. History isn't really history unless it's alive within us, and so nice to have people recounting their tales, their funny little snippets, and we're going to start with Boyd Boland. He had a nice little bit at Harvest of Voices this past year, and I thought it'd be a great way to kick it off. It's a piece called The Names of Paonia, I believe. Is that right, Boyd?
That's right.
All right. Well, here we go.
Good afternoon. I'm Boyd Boland, a proud Eagle graduate of Paonia High School. I have children. Some are from Hotchkiss, I understand.
No, my three all graduated from Paonia, that's why. No, I'm kidding.
My three children are Norman, Kate, and Clara, named for their grandfather, great-grandmother, the names of Paonia. I grew up in a little mountain town in western Colorado. The founder, Samuel Wade, wanted to name the town after his favorite flower, the peony, using the Latin. P-R-O-N-I-A. The post office department refused the name, saying that the A-E ligature is not American. So the town became Paonia by default, with a regular old A. My sisters were named after the girls in the Basic Reader series, Sally, Jane, and Betty. We had a cat named Puff and an uncle named Dick. Then I came along. I'm Boyd. In the Paonia of my youth, there were three Boyds: Boyd Boland, Boyd Emmons, and the other Boyd, whose last name is lost to the vagaries of time. My father was Norman. He was an apple farmer and the manager of the Union Fruit Company. His chief competitor was a man named Carol Wade, Sam's grandson. My father's friend was Virgil Freiberger. Virgil was married to Peg. When Virgil died, Peg remarried to a man named Oscar Rice. Peg wasn't really her name. Her name was Fannie Mae, which reminds me of my grandmother, Fannie Lou, which reminds me of my other grandmother, Luluetta May, which reminds me of my mother's friend, Ada May. We lived on Sunshine Mesa, midway between the towns of Paonia and Hotchkiss. Hotchkiss, of course, is named for its founder, Enos Hotchkiss. All of the men on Sunshine Mesa were farmers. Herb Blankenship, Trustin McAllister, Trustin's son-in-law, Hurley Jack Hayden, Hurley Jack's sons, Herschel and Claire, and Tops Holeby. In the valley below our mesa were cattle ranchers, including the Camel brothers, Wayne and Cal, Dewey Maurer, and Red Hughes. My friend was Angus McCammett. His father, Wally, was the lawyer. In the neighboring town of Mayer was a man who knew how to skin hogs, Curly Pfeiffer. Curly's sons included Luce and Kermit. Peonia had a Clem and a Claude.
I hate to interrupt, but I had an older brother, Charles Herbert.
There you go, Charles Herbert. What was his last name?
Piper.
Oh,
I'm a Piper.
you're a Pfeiffer. So,
Great.
including Luce and Kermit, then...
Well, yeah, Kermit is 6 years younger than I am. All the rest of them have passed. But there was a baby born first, and he only lived 4 days. And Mother told me once she wanted 4 boys, but she didn't know she was going to have 5 girls to get 4 boys.
I'm glad you interrupted.
Well, I'm sorry, but I didn't want to leave my older brother out.
I'm glad you didn't. Peonia had a Clem and a Claude. Clem Auden ran a coal mine. Claude Davis was in charge of the school buses. When my father died, my mother applied for a job with the superintendent of schools, M. Malcolm Drake. Malcolm's first name was Marion. He had a son, Burns. It's a good thing that Burns wasn't the son of my 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Bacon. Malcolm Drake was the superintendent for many years. When he retired, he was replaced by a younger man, Laddie Livingston. The assistant superintendent was Mo Kreitz, who was married to Dorothy Nell. Peonia had its own Homer and Marge. Homer Taylor was a janitor. Marge Porteous was an English teacher. There were many other school teachers, of course. Mardell Stevens, Henrietta Grable, Cora Mordecai, Ruby Davis, no relation to my 6th grade reading teacher, Dot Davis, Gladys Van Gorder, Mamie Beasley, that was Ward's wife, math teachers Mildred Camel, Cattleman Cal Camel's wife, and Nina Bestie, Tib Snedden, who taught English, and Zori Zackley. The football coach was Granville King, no relation to the surveyor Sebring King. The principal of the junior high school was Roscoe Etherton. When Roscoe retired, he was replaced by MacDonald Knight, no relation to banker Hobart Knight, whose father, Sherrill, was an apple farmer. Arvinstall ran a big orchard on the north side of the North Fork River. Commodore Wilson and his son Gilbert had an orchard on the south side. Steve and Cleve Hudson had the old Excelsior place. The car mechanic was Harry Carey. He was married to Mary Carey. The man who ran the dairy was Orville Schneider. Peonia had 2 shorties and 1 tolly. Shorty Hunton ran the hardware store. Shorty Wood was the postmaster. Tolly Johnson played the trombone. The doctors were Woody Brown and Clyde Hink. Clinton Clock owned the washateria, and Pete Polis cut hair. Across the gully from our farm was a vineyard run by Steve Rhodes. He bottled his wine under the label S. Rhodes. I think he should have used his father's name, Dusty. Thank you.
All right, hopefully all the old names are warmed up now, and I'd like to invite Janice Cooper-Rue up next.
Well, I'm Janice Rubel Cooper, and of course, I grew up around here. And it's been my pleasure to volunteer at the museum and work on the newspaper project with Kathy Adams McKee and Inez Potteroff, Karen Martin, Lois Cotton, Elaine Violet, Katie Gannott, and Sherry Wilkening. This was Kathy Adams's dream, and she worked tirelessly on this project. And we're fortunate to have the North Fork Times and the Hotchkiss Herald starting in 1905. And while they're not complete, we're thankful for what we do have. And since the newspapers are fragile, the copies of the information are filed in binders and are available at the museum. And we're currently working on 1938. And it's been a real walk through my family's history for me. We always knew the dates of births or deaths or things like that, but not the day-to-day events. So like when you painted your house or you won the horse race at the county fair. And I'm just going to tell you a couple of stories about the Rubel side of my ancestry. And they came to the Crawford Mare area in 1895 to 1897 from Bluefield, Virginia. My grandfather Osmond Ellis Rubel Jr., Sr., my father was a junior and he went by Ellis. Well, Oz died when I was 11, and all I remember about him was an elderly gentleman with emphysema. So the papers have provided a really great look at his life. We grew up with a story that he went to the pen for poaching, and I've been looking for that story, and finally on March 18th of 1937, the Hotchkiss Herald, the story appeared on the front page. The headlines reading, "Beaver pelts cost rancher $800 fine." O.E. Rubel, about 50, a well-known Redlands Mesa rancher for the past 23 years, was fined $800 plus cost, charges of illegal possession of 14 beaver pelts and 1 deer hide. It stated that Oz was taken into custody by the state game warden from Grand Junction, the deputy game warden from Palisade, and the state trapper from Olathe. So a raid on the Rubel Ranch uncovered the hides in the granary, and Rubel readily admitted to the possession and offered no defense. The beaver were trapped in and near the Overland Ditch last fall as Rubel was employed as the ditch rider by the company. He did not employ legal counsel, pled guilty, and paid $500 and was given 30 days to pay the remainder. I can't imagine how much $800 was in 1937. And I presume that the beaver were illegal to trap, but they were probably a pest at the Overland, and I also wonder if someone didn't turn him in. And no matter what, we now know the true story about this. So anyway, in another family story, Oz's brother, William Bill, my great-uncle, also made the paper on September 28, 1916 on the front page. The article read, "A bad mixture and a miraculous escape in auto accident." An automobile accident occurred Saturday on Hanson Mesa near the Teets place, in which the 2 occupants, Bill Rubel and Joe Carlston of the Paonia Garage, miraculously escaped with their lives. The report is that the car was being driven at a tremendous rate of speed. Some say 60 to 70 mile an hour. This is in 1916. So, for some unaccountable reason, the machine left the highway and plunged into the Farmer's Canal and buried itself a foot or 2 in the mud on the opposite bank. The occupants were landed in a squash patch, several rods over the fence. Carlston carrying the steering gear, which I presume is the steering wheel, with him, and Rubel coming in contact with a good big squash with sufficient violence to cause a total wreck of the squash. The unfortunate men were soon able to navigate, but the car was not extracted from its mooring until Sunday afternoon. The car and men escaped with only minor injuries. And that would have happened on a Saturday night, so I wonder, probably. But anyway, I still can't imagine 60 or 70 mile an hour on the roads in 1916. That's got to be impossible. The next is about Oz and Bill's older sister, Nora Rubel Isom, my great aunt. Colin Hutton, the Nora's great-great-grandson, had a family story about Nora going off the cemetery hill. And on the front page of the January 2nd, 1913 Hotchkiss Herald, and also in the North Fork Times, the article headline read, "Thomas Isom and wife injured in runaway." The Isoms and the C.M. Fast and wife started down the grade, and the tongue of the wagon fell, allowing the vehicle to push the team. So they were, being a pair of young horses, they ran. Mr. and Mrs. Isom were thrown from the wagon and down the hill over 100 feet. The other couple jumped and were not injured. Mrs. Isom had a broken shoulder and numerous bruises. This would have occurred on New Year's Day in 1913, and of course the road into Hotchkiss was down the cemetery hill at that time. Nora passed away not too long after this. Quite a story, but it was not quite the story that Colin had always grown up with. So it's really nice to have, you know, a first-hand account. It straightens out some of the stories we didn't know. And as we've worked on this project for many years, two things that were said during this time have really stuck. In the very beginning of the project, I believe we were reading about building the sidewalks in Hotchkiss. And, you know, we started in 1905. So, and Inez Potteroff all of a sudden just came back and said, wasn't it amazing what we got accomplished when we didn't wait on a government grant? Now, if you know Inez, you can only visualize her saying this. The other was what Lois Cotton said one day. She made the point that we always read about the important people, certain people in town, but it was really the hardworking men and women that accomplished the amazing things that no one remembers. The supplement to the North Fork Times in 1899 has an article on each of the noteworthy citizens, but at the end of the article is a short history of the Fire Mountain Canal and the Overland. And about the Fire Mountain, the editor says that by pluck and energy along 22 miles of canal was dug in order to deliver water. A body of hardy but poor pioneers left their ranches during the winter months and subjected themselves to the rigorous and inclement weather, denying themselves the comforts, if not the necessities of life. That must have been a remarkable accomplishment in 1900. Some of the interesting things that I remember as we've been on this journey, some of the most entertaining things were the local items. And they tell who ate dinner with who went fishing, who had a baby, who got a new radio. And so that all those little things are really, I don't know, they're really interesting. So, for instance, the zinnia was voted in as the Hotchkiss flower in April 18th of 1935 by the townspeople. In July 9th of 1936, the Hotchkiss Herald reported that Bert Crouch had been working in the hills during building a phone line from Duke Stump to the Bailey Reservoir. For those of you not familiar, Duke Stump is just across the forest line going up the LaRue Creek where the Ranger Station Pool Camp was. And I find it amazing there was a phone line there, much less that they were going to run it to the Bailey Reservoir, which is probably another 10 miles. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, maybe they hung it on trees, I don't know, but anyway. And then Edmund Wilson was doing research, family research, and came across an article July 21st of 1911 in the North Fork Times and commented that some things never changed. It read, the burglars broke into the pool hall Wednesday night and stole the contents of the slot machine and cigars. They pried open the back door to effect the entrance. So we had a slot machines in 1911 and burglars. So there were lots of articles as the cars became more common. You know, the wrecks between the horses and the cars. Obviously, they were speeding or whatever. Anyway, there's lots of interesting articles about that. And then on July 17th, 1924, on the front page of the Hotchkiss Herald, under the Redlands Mesa News was this paragraph. Ellen Rubel is entertaining a boil on the back of her neck. Now, she was my Aunt Ellen. And at this time, as we're reading through the Redlands Mesa and all the news, at this time, her future husband, Clifford McLaughlin, was courting her. Now, I can't even imagine that it appeared in the newspaper that you were entertaining a boil. Really interesting things. So, and in the, you know, we had a lot of doctors, we had a lot of preachers, but if you needed a hospital, you had to go to Salida to the hospital. It's, you know, quite a journey. And so, and as the other article was, you know, all the women's clubs, and there were many women's clubs, the reporters would have an article about the meeting. And a lot of them ended with having dainty refreshments. And I will always wonder what a dainty refreshment is. And the obituaries are one of the most important parts of the newspaper for the family history, and we've been trying to complete and add to the obituary file and work with the Hotchkiss Cemetery Secretary Sandy Dix to expand their records. And she's been adding those to the Find a Grave site. So anyway, it's been a pleasure to work on the newspaper project, and even if you don't know anybody, it's really entertaining to read the local items in the gossip column, and you know, it's a phenomenal insight into just the day-to-day lives of all the people here. But anyway, I thank you so much, and you know, please support the museum. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Janice. And on the note of newspapers, we have some really good news. We applied for a grant of $3,000 to digitize the Crawford Chronicle, which we don't have physical copies of, and we got it. So hopefully this year, we'll have the whole Crawford Chronicle from, I think, 1907 up until the 50s, available online through the Colorado Historic Newspaper Project. If you've never heard of that, come by the museum. I can show you. You can type in any keyword, any name, anything you want, and it's so easy to navigate and look through those old newspapers to clip it out. So thankful for all the work we've done at the museum, and so excited for everything we can do in the future. I thought at this point, speaking of digitization, it'd be a fun thing to share a little whistle solo from the annual meeting of 1986. I think this was right in this room. I don't think I've ever heard anything like this. I guess they used to have entertainment before these meetings, so maybe next year we'll have a whistle soloer. Our next speaker is Tom Wills. He's got a little bit of mythology and mystery for you.
So what I have kind of really fits into what Janice was talking about as far as the newspapers. The story that I'm going to tell is actually was originally appeared, or at least the core of it appeared in the 1906, in the winter of 1906, in the Norfolk Times, and it probably is a not totally factual story, I think. They were relating a story that had occurred 30 years before in the 1906 Herald, because the person that the story's about had died in 1876. Anyway, once upon a time, we might as well start it that way. In 1907 in downtown Hotchkiss, there were, in the Norfolk Times office, there were three human skulls. And two of the skulls had just arrived, according to a 1907 Norfolk Times little sidebar piece, from somebody who had absconded with them, or probably had dug them up in a cliff dwelling down around Montezuma. There were two Anasazi Indian skulls. For some reason, he brought them to the newspaper office, because we didn't have a museum in 1907, I guess, or, he figured. And the other reason he probably brought them to the newspaper office was the newspaper office already had a skull. They had a human skull, according to the newspaper. And when I saw this first saw these articles, I kept thinking, these must be like April 1st issues or something. It was so far-fetched. Anyway, the skull belonged to a man named Enoch Holloway, E-N-O-C-H Holloway, which, that's what, it kind of put me off because I went, Enos Hotchkiss, Enoch Holloway, the names seem awfully familiar, awfully similar to one another. So the story was, in 1906, the year before, they had a story, and I'm going to read you the actual story from the Norfolk Times of the finding of Enoch Holloway, which was Kabul Fort proved to be his tomb. The skeleton of Enoch Holloway, the first white man to enter the fertile Norfolk country, who was hemmed in and murdered by a band of Utes on the warpath in this section 30 years ago, was found yesterday by J. Smith, a pioneer in this section. The bones of the brave and sturdy pathfinder, together with his rifle and other personal possessions, which had defied the influence of the elements for 30 years, were discovered under a circular pile of rocks 5 miles from Hotchkiss on what is known as the Harrison Wood Ranch. And that would be on eastern Hanson Mesa, next to Jay Creek. The finding of the skeleton clears up the mystery of 3 decades and recalls a life story that is full of love, romance, pathos, and mystery. The fate of Holloway, who sought a home in the fertile and productive valley of the Norfolk country, has always been a matter of conjecture. When last he was heard from, he was surrounded by Utes on the warpath, whom he was fighting from behind an improvised cobblestone fort that for 30 years has proven to be his tomb. There is no question as to the identity of the skeleton found on the Wood Ranch, for the rifle and other articles found are proof, and his skull shows a bullet mark which Holloway received in a fight with Indians in eastern Colorado. In 1876, Holloway left the Pueblo country to make an exploratory tour of the western part of the state. He was accompanied by his wife. He was accompanied by his wife, a half-breed Cheyenne of the Cheyenne tribe. While on the trip, he was seen several times by hunters and prospectors. The last time was at or near where Montrose now stands. From there, he left for the Norfolk country. In the late fall, his wife dragged herself into Saguache, Colorado, and reported that her husband was hemmed in by the Utes when she left, and he had made her leave in the night. She made the trip to Saguache in 7 days, a feat that has never been duplicated. Help could not be sent, so it was known that he must have died miserably at the hands of the vengeful Indians. And versions of this story, this is an interesting sidebar to this. Versions of this story, this is in 1906. They went viral all across the United States. Right now, in fact, I was Googling it, I was trying to find out something more about Enoch Holloway, and I found the story printed in a historic newspaper on one of those historic newspaper sites from the San Francisco Chronicle. And a lot of there was versions in the Denver Post, the local regional papers. They changed some of the details here and there. One of them claimed that he killed 20 redskins before he was put down. I'm not sure who counted 20 redskins, you know. And it kind of, and another one said that he was scalped by the Indians and all this sort of thing. Of course, it brings up a lot of questions, which is the mythology part, which is, okay, so we found a guy, and he had his rifle and all his possessions there. Well, if the Indians killed him, how come they left his rifle and all his possessions? It could have just been a guy that had died and somebody had piled rocks on top of him, because it was described as a circular pile of rocks. They called it a cobble fort, but it was a circular pile of rocks. In other words, J. Smith maybe was trying to get rocks to build something out of, and he started unpiling these rocks, and there was a body underneath the rocks. So somebody might have buried somebody. We don't know for sure that it was this, but the story must have been around, because they kept saying that everybody, the way the story, these newspaper stories have things that you read between the lines and you go, well, they must have known a story about somebody who disappeared. And then the thing about his wife walking 7 days and she went to Saguache, which if you, I was born just a few miles from Saguache in Villa Grove, and Saguache is in the San Luis Valley. And actually Enos Hotchkiss is one of the founders of Saguache, which is another interesting connection, and also a founder of Lake City. But if you walk from here to Saguache, in between, at the time, there was a few cabins at Gunnison in 1876. They had started, the city of Gunnison had started. There was also the Los Pinos Indian Agency, and there was also Lake City, and all three of those places were a lot closer than Saguache. So she took quite a, and if she did it in 7 days, you'd think she did it in a direct route, and if she did that, she would have went right through Gunnison or someplace like that, where there was, anyway, there's parts of the story that don't make a whole lot of sense, but it was taken as fact, and then of course the next year they said that they had Enos Hotchkiss, or Enoch Holloway's skull in the newspaper office, and you think, well, if you knew so much about this guy, didn't he have relatives who would kind of not take kindly to that, and he found his whole body? What'd you do, send his headless body home to somebody, or why did you keep his skull in the newspaper office? and at the end of the thing, they said that he I was looking for the passage here, but anyway, they said that they'd added these two skulls, and that Enoch Holloway's had no comment on it, and it was just getting along with him just fine. The two Indians. Of course, today the whole thing would be pretty illegal.
Where are they now?
And that's another question: is what happened to the skulls in the newspaper office? Because you wouldn't think they would just sit around there. But of course, the thing is that this happened in 1876. The reservation was closed in 1881 after the 1879 Beaker Massacre. From the late 1870s, there was a huge political pressure to close the Indian reservation, and any sort of story like this would have been a big deal. Of see those nasty Indians and you see what they did to somebody who that would have been more fuel for that political fire. So if you wonder if the original story wasn't maybe semi-fictional, and then they tied it to somebody else, or it's one of those things it's really fascinating, and somebody that has a lot of time, maybe somebody can find Enoch Holloway's relatives somewhere, because they made it sound like that people knew him, but you can't find. I've Googled and Googled and Googled, and all you can find is this old story. So that's all I found. So anyway, that's that one. Thank you very much.
It's one thing to remember stories of old people. It's another thing to have a sense of the landscape. And we're going to have Dixie come up and talk about that big, beautiful cottonwood that sits up on the ridge on Rogers Mesa. It's been a landmark for a long time. So.
Thank you, that's good. I don't have any near as entertaining as stories as you've just heard. I think the big thing of this to me is we are ingrained in history, and to preserve it is an obligation, I believe. And so that's why I'm here today. The big tree, the cottonwood tree that's on the corner of 92 and 3000 Road is a historic landmark in my estimation, my bringing up. And the state highway has kind of looked at that as a thing they might like to take down. And when the first discussion of the improvement, enlargement, let people go faster, that's an improvement, right? A woman that we all know, or many of you know, by the name of Joan Queen said, "You tell them if they are going to take down that tree, they're going to have my nude body wrapped around it, and they'll have to take me with it." And so when Joan passed, I said, "Thank you, Joan. I will try to keep that legacy going on." I know for a fact that there is the ashes of a woman who taught school in HCHS, Sharon Holton, whose son put her ashes around that tree, unbeknownst to most of us, until about 10 years ago. Her son told me when we were dealing with State Highway, he said, "My mother's ashes are there, and so if they can gather those up and move them, then I guess they can take down the tree." But I'd like to try to get this tree designated with some kind of historical significance to our community. And that will be one of my goals. And I've heard stories that Mrs. Barrow, Jessie Barrow's family, owned that property where my family owns today, and there was a English cottonwood. Mary, what did you tell me it was?
Carl, what kind of a tree is it? It's a
Fremont.
Fremont.
Okay, whatever, that's something we need to, those trees were not native to this area, and they were brought in and planted, so it's one of the largest trees that are still there on Rogers Mesa. So, and because it's in the place it is, it gets a lot of attention. I have a business from the area and from the Montrose area called Rescue Tree Service, who's offered to come in and prune that tree, take out the old stuff, and try to help continue it on. They're doing it on their dime, and they are going to put a little sign there. But I've asked them before they get ready to do that, if we could find some way to make this tree have some historical significance, designation, to ensure that since Joan Queen's not here anymore, and I'm probably not going to be here much longer, so we need to preserve that tree. And so if you know any stories about the tree, if there's anything, you may know some things that we don't know. That I heard that was a place where when people, my dad told us always that when people left Hotchkiss and they drove their team and buggy to Delta, they stopped at that big tree because the water that comes down there, called Big Gulch, is a pretty good perpetual stream of water. And so that was a stopping place for people. So we need to try to, if anybody knows anything about those or had any documentation, I would love to have that, and we will work on trying to preserve the tree. Thank you.
Thanks so much. All right, I'm so grateful that Carl Clay has been around the last couple of years and has really helped me walk into the position of president, and so grateful to have him as historian, because it's not just the past that we're preserving, it's the historical society, it's a whole living entity of what this history is. And so here's Carl Clay.
Thank you, man. I was surprised that Dixie seemed to be soliciting somebody to become naked to save a tree. I'm not a candidate. One of the delightful things that happened over the last 2 years when I had the privilege of working closely with the volunteers at the museum was the request by a family to come and do some family history research. And so on March 28th last year, we had a family come who wanted to learn something more about the Prentice family. How many of you know the name Prentice in Hotchkiss? So I'm interested in hearing your stories about that if you have things that you'd like to add to what we know. So what I know is that on that date last year, Karen von Haften, who was the daughter of Joyce Prentice Littlejohn, and her 2 daughters came to visit the museum. We spent 4 hours together doing family history. And what was exciting about it was that our theme, our mission statement for the museum and for the Historical Society is preserving the past for future generations. And so this was a picture of that exact thing. Here we had the daughter of a resident many years prior who brought her 2 daughters, and together we started looking. So the only thing I knew about the Prentice family when they showed up was that I knew they had a dairy up on Barrow Mesa. Don't know exactly where it is or was. It may be in the area where Art Wolverton currently lives, but it was up there. And I know that over the years, in my growing up years, there were bottles of milk that appeared on our doorstep that came from the dairy. And the other thing is that they were well known in the community. They didn't make the paper too much, except for Dick. But let me tell you about who they are. Floyd and Gertrude Prentice lived on Barrow Mesa. They must have come here when in their 20s or 30s, because the articles that we have about their kids in school are in the 1937-1938 period that Janice and her crew are researching currently. Dick was in the class of 1938. My Uncle Merville was a classmate. Now get a picture here. I didn't know anything about the Prentices except that the American Legion building, what we call the American Legion hut, was the building next door to the home that I grew up in over on B Street. And it was the Laura Prentice American Legion hut. I didn't know who Laura was, and I didn't know who Prentice was. I thought maybe it was a misspelling of a lady's name, but it turns out to be a casualty of World War I from our area, Jean Laura, and a Prentice named Dick Prentice. But Dick graduated with the class of 1938. My Uncle Merville was a classmate. They had a football coach by the name of Humphreys. One of the articles that Janice sent to me just recently was one in the Hotchkiss Herald in 1938 that said one of the teammates of Dick on the Hotchkiss Bulldogs football team was caught by the Coach Humphreys, carrying Betty Orton around the hall. Do you know Betty Orton? Charlene White knows Betty Orton, it's her aunt. The article in the paper said Dick's classmate or teammate said, "This is the way I get strong." And the article went on to say, every boy on the football team is trying to get strong. So Janice and Joyce were identical twins. They were in the class of 1941. They were classmates of my mother, Willetta, and my dad's brother, Scott. And they were involved in so many things that we found in our newspaper research notebooks. They were active, and especially in music and just gifted area things. Then there was a gal in the class of 1941 by the name of Gertrude Prentice, but it turns out her name was Gertrude Wilcox Prentice. She and Dick apparently got married when she was a senior in high school, which is a little bit counterintuitive because my perception is that in the old days, if you were married, sometimes you weren't permitted to go to school. At least you couldn't participate in, activities in the school and so forth. But she graduated in the class of 1941. So that was Gertrude. It's kind of coincidental that Dick married a lady named Gertrude and his mother's name was Gertrude. And then there was Wayne, who graduated in the class of 1945. And in my family, he was a classmate of my Aunt Nadine. And then Norman graduated in the class of 1947, and his classmate was my Aunt Eleanor. So every one of the Prentice kids were classmates of every one of my aunts or uncles. I never knew the Prentices. Mom used to talk about Joyce and Janice, the twins, but that's all I knew, except the bottles of milk that came from someplace. So that's how we started our survey. All of this information came from the yearbooks that we have on file at the museum. We went through those to find out when they graduated and what was happening and so forth. We found out that Dick was the left tackle on the football team, and that in the fall of 1947 they lost to the Olathe Pirates 18-0. Bad day. But what we do know is that Dick, so he graduated in 1938 and he married Gertrude in 1941. The first article that we were able to find out, except out of high school news, was that Dick was in Pearl Harbor, deathly ill with the mumps. The first time I saw the name Dick or Richard Prentice was on a display we have at the Veterans Honor display at the museum. And Dick is the only one that has a star by his name. And I thought that probably had significance, but I had no idea what it was. Well, he was in Pearl Harbor. Just made sense that perhaps he was a casualty of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. But the paper said no, he was in the hospital with a serious case of mumps. So how did he die? Well, we dug a little further, and it turns out that Dick, after he got out of the hospital, was assigned to a ship that deployed petroleum products, gasoline, and other products for the ships in the South Pacific, and it was torpedoed by the Japanese. They never found anything of the ship or anything of the people on it. So Dick has no place in any cemetery and very little place in history. It's a tragic thing that happened to him. So Gertrude, his bride, when she was a senior in high school, went to California with her mother. And I don't know the particulars of it. The newspaper articles only talk about that they went there to vacation, perhaps to meet Dick, I don't know. But while they were there, she got killed. She was murdered by the Chevy dealer in Hotchkiss. Apparently he had an insane jealousy about her mother. And so he followed them to California. And I don't have any way of proving this. My guess is that in the process of his trying to kill the mother, Gertrude stepped in between and she got killed instead. I don't know anything about the Wilcox family. I don't know anything. If you look at our website where all of the headstones are on the map on our website, you'll find both the father and the mother. You won't find anything about Dick or about Gertrude. They're not there. Floyd died in 1959 and Gertrude died in 1979. I just mentioned several happenstance things about how the Clay family and the Thornberry family intersected with the Prentice family that I knew nothing about. But what I found in going through our obituary files was that my dad served as a pallbearer for both of the parents' funerals. And I don't know why we never met them. Just kind of one of those fun historic things, isn't it? So how would we have come by this information if that wasn't there? It's only by our coming to be honest about what we say we stand for, preserving the past for future generations. That's the only reason we were able to find it. And I had the privilege of being able to share it with you today. Thank you.
I hope I can do my part. I'm really honored to be a part of it since I was not born here. I did not have my childhood here, but I love it. And I love helping to facilitate in the preservation. And hopefully, history has so many perspectives. And so hopefully open it up to, just patience and grace and respect. So thank you all for coming, and hope to see you around.
Can I ask you? Have people been able to look at what you've put over here in the display? And
Carl's just asking if everyone has had a chance to go through the exhibits. I'll be around, and I think, Mary and David are still over there if you wanted to learn a bit more. If you want to know more about the website, come on by. Happy to share and happy to get to know anyone.
Thank you.
Oh.